What's up, y'all? You're listening to the Extra Point College Football Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Carnes, joined as always by my co-host, Daniel Hammock. Daniel, we finished up the ACC Atlantic last week. We are back for the better half of the ACC, if we're being honest. The ACC Coastal, we branded ourselves as a Coastal Pod, so this is an episode I've been excited for.
Yeah, this is one of these where, like you said last week, we could just do a random number generator, and it probably has just as good a chance as picking the Coastal winner as we do. But definitely an intriguing side of the division, just because with their not one figurehead, everybody feels like they got a shot. In the Atlantic, everybody knows Clemson's the one, and everybody's basically battling for bowl games and things like that, get the better bowl, all that kind of stuff, eventually take a swing at Clemson. This side, there's not one pedigree above the rest. So, your Virginia is just as confident as maybe Duke, I don't know, but definitely Miami and, North Carolina. So I'm excited.
We appreciate the feedback we got on the last episode. The most feedback I got from our picks was on Twitter. Be sure to follow us at Jacob Carnes with a K, at Deep South Daniel on Twitter. We got some buzz surrounding our Wake Forest pick. So I put out there, we might be wrong about Wake Forest, and we heard back that we're probably wrong about Wake Forest, but hey, we'll stick to it. I'm rooting for them. I hope they win 7 or 8 games. We picked 5 and 7. Sorry about that.
You know that the early odds are Wake Forest is actually favored over Florida State, and we were just like, oh yeah, that's a Florida State win. So that's something to keep in mind. We were both very high on Florida State, relatively speaking, and that's something where Florida State ain't out of the woods yet. So let's just see.
Not yet. Let's go to the Coastal. So we're going to do the same thing we did last week, with starting at the top of the conference with where we think is going to finish, like 1 through 7. We'll go all the way through. Let's start at the top. So you got 2 teams. Everybody's got 2 teams. Miami, North Carolina. We'll have to see when ACC Media Days comes around. I feel like North Carolina will have the most picks to win the Coastal. And we're going Miami. So Miami, we're going to start with Miami coming off of an 8-3 season. This is Manny Diaz's second season as head coach. This is his 3rd season. That was year 2 last year.
Right.
And 3rd season as a head coach. Their win total is set at 9.5. De'Aaron King coming off of a knee injury. Will he be healthy? That's some lofty expectations for Miami.
I mean, just go ahead and, open up the ceiling, because they're going through the roof here. So I really like Miami this year. Make no, secrets about it. But there's a lot of reasons to feel this way. First of all, it's going to be a lot of their returning talent. But more specifically, I feel like they're going to get better in a lot of areas. One is they're actually going to have Manny Diaz, head coach, take over as the defensive coordinator. So I really feel strongly that their best defenses recently have been those that were Manny Diaz coached, specifically under Mark Richt. And so I really feel strongly that the defense is going to, even though they lost some edge guys, 3 notably that all got drafted. They lost some in the draft this past year. Jalen Phillips, Greg Rousseau, and then Quincy Roche. They have a lot to really build around going forward. They have 9 returning starters on defense coming back. Bubba Bolden, one of the best safeties expected this year. They've got some transfers that are really big. I guess the counterpoint I'll say is with Manny Diaz really focusing on the defense this year. Rhett Lashley is going to kind of be the head coach of the offense in a way. But defensively, Tyreek Stevenson coming in to be that lockdown corner from Georgia, that transfer. A lot of these guys, really can, rally around that. I think he's got some great experience. He's coming home. That's his big thing, is he wants to come back to Miami, where he's from. Avante Williams, definitely a talented guy, going to be in there as well at safety position. But, I mean, they got a couple 5 stars this year. Leonard Taylor and James Williams. I expect big things from them. So you're talking about a defense that was already talented, already had a lot of returning players, and then you're just infusing it with more talent, more 5 stars. I think it's just going to push the guys that are already there, and you're going to have some quality depth. So some of these games that they may have gotten, where they weren't close with, whether it be Clemson if they play them in the ACC Championship game, or North Carolina, they're going to be able to play their peers further throughout the game. So that's one thing. Now, offense is what we really like talking about. They have 11 guys coming back. So that's huge. The biggest thing is some of these receivers are actually going to get passed up by some of the guys that are coming in. So Mike Harley, he's going to be that remaining starter. I think he's at almost 800 yards last year, 7 touchdowns, just a big time playmaker. The other guys that started, Mark Pope, D. Wiggins, and Will Mallory, all had a very high drop rate. And so that's something where athletically they have the skill to be a top of the line ACC receiver. But really, I think they're better suited for more of a role playing role. And it's perfect because Charleston Rambo is coming in from Oklahoma as a transfer, former 4-star wide receiver, has a good 2019 season, not so great 2020 season, but he's looking to bounce back. On top of that, just the receivers they've got coming in, really high on Romello Brinson out of Miami, just a 4-star receiver, but a highly rated 4-star. Jacoby George, another guy to look at. Both of those guys, I think, come in and immediately upgrade your profile out wide. Some of the biggest concerns we have with them are on their offensive line, and they've got 5 starters coming back. They've also, I think, going to take a year to grow in this Rhett Lashley offense. And, above it all, they've got the backfield. D'Eriq King is back at quarterback. Will he be healthy? I think he will. And if he's not, they just got Jake Garcia, who is a former 5-star. I think he ended up being a 4-star as a recruit, to be the backup. And I think that's huge because in years past, they haven't had guys who could deliver the ball accurately. And I think they've got 2 of them now. So even if D'Eriq King isn't 100%, they have to hold him out for any amount of games. Or if he gets hurt, God forbid, they can go to this guy. And I think that he can play winning football for them. The running backs, Cameron Harris returns. Don Chaney Jr. is back again. And, I think that, Jalen Knighton and those guys are talented, but they've got Cody Brown coming in from Parkview. I just think he was committed, or he had signed with Tennessee and ended up in the transfer portal, and I guess got released from his letter of intent and able to just go to Miami. So they've got just so much talent all over the place. I think that last year they took a step and they kind of raised the floor of their program under Manny Diaz and with this Rhett Lashley offense. I think this is the year that they can take a step and really push to be the upper echelon of not only the ACC, but the nation.
We are betting on Miami's success, and it's likely going to come on 2 things. One, can Manny Diaz fix the defense? And he did something similar last offseason with the offense, where he pretty much cleaned house, brought in a new staff, and yes, you had D'Eriq King, but the offense got fixed in one offseason. Like, the offense was night and day different.
Right.
I know they went 8-3 last year, but in their 2 losses in the regular season, they gave up 42 points to Clemson and 62 points to North Carolina. They got torched on that defensive side of the ball.
Oh, yeah.
Manny Diaz has cleaned house. He's calling the defense this year. He's like, I'm taking back the reins. I'm calling plays. Those players are going to be held accountable by the head coach himself now. He's handed the keys over to that offense over to Rhett Lashley. Can he do something similar that they did with the offense, with their defense? That's one. 2, it's the right knee of D'Eriq King. Is D'Eriq King healthy? If he's healthy, and we're kind of betting on this here, we're 10-2 for Miami. And honestly, I think the ceiling for Miami is 11-1. They're not beating Alabama the first game. They're just not. But they can win every other game on their schedule. They have the roster to win every other game on their schedule. They play North Carolina on the road. We're picking that as a win for Miami. And, offensive line has been a problem over the last 2 years. It was improved last year. They returned their top 8 guys in offensive line. Secondary, you mentioned lockdown corner and Tyreek Stevenson you're bringing in from Georgia. And they will have one of the best safety duos in the country with Bubba Bolden and Gervin Hall. And you mentioned a guy like James Williams, a 5-star freshman coming in. He's probably not going to sniff the field because of how deep they are at safety. Like, those are their top 2 guys, and they're going to play a lot. But they've got 2 more guys in Amari Carter and Avante Williams, who's also a freshman.
Right.
Like, it's just they're deep in the secondary. Where they're weak is linebacker. And linebacker was a problem last year. You saw that get exposed against teams that had really good running backs. So think back to their losses last year. Chuba Hubbard of Oklahoma State, Javonte Williams, and Michael Carter at North Carolina, and then Travis Etienne at Clemson. Those are the 3 losses. The best running backs they played got exposed at linebacker. They don't have that on the schedule this year. Like, they just don't. They're going to play Alabama in the opener. That's the best running backs they're going to face all season. And so their weakness kind of gets to get covered up by the schedule. Can they get some momentum figured out by the end of the year? 10-2 for Miami, 7-1 in the ACC, which puts them atop the Coastal, facing Clemson in that ACC Championship game. Well, let's move on to the other team we talked about, North Carolina. North Carolina coming off of their best season since, to be honest, I don't know. It's been a long time. 8-4 last year under Mac Brown. He comes in 2019, goes 7-6. 2020, they go 8-4. The big conversation piece is always going to start at quarterback with Sam Howell his junior year. It's year 3 of Sam Howell. Everyone expects a big jump. We expect Sam Howell to play well, but we didn't pick him to win the Coastal. Give me your thoughts on the Tar Heels.
So this is a product of we've seen this before, and we're not going to get fooled again. And it's not necessarily to do with North Carolina. Just a scenario of, hey, they return all their offensive linemen and their stud quarterback or their, third-year starter quarterback, but they lose all their receivers or they lose most of their receiving production. But not only that, they lose 2,000-yard rushers out of the backfield. Now, you and I have talked, and I think it's funny because we might say, hey, I'm high on this or I feel good about this, but until we put wins and losses to it, we really don't know what currency we're talking about. I might say, hey, I feel good about Florida State, but my good is I think they'll go 7-5 this year. I feel pretty good about it. And your good is like, hey, I thought they were 9-3. So
no.
But neither one of those, we don't know. We don't know. We just both feel differently. So same with North Carolina. I think I said I feel good about them, and you were like, whoa, pump the brakes. But I think your thought was that I was like the national media where, hey, let's go ahead and put 12-0 or 11-1 on this puppy and just, keep cooking with Crisco. I am definitely of the stance that I think they're going to take a step forward from 8-4. I think they're going to take a good step forward, but I don't think that they're going to be taking a step towards elite. Losing De'Ami Brown and Daz Newsome outside, they were just such big playmakers. And then Michael Carter and Javonte Williams in the backfield, I think is going to be too much initially. Sam Howell, what he has meant to Mac Brown's start at North Carolina cannot be understated. I think that he accelerated this turnaround, and I think that they are going to continue to, be more than a basketball school. I think that that's definitely something that's going to be on the horizon. I think 10-win seasons will start to become a regularity here. If they're able to continue to stockpile what they've been doing. They're recruiting, second to third in the ACC right now. And so that profile is going to lend well for them over the long term. As far as their team goes, there's a reason people are picking them. 5 returning offensive line starters, 8 total on offense. Obviously, that includes Sam Howell. Defensively, 8 returning starters on defense. Definitely mix in some guys. And then, they do, I guess I got to give them some credit. Losing those 2 stud running backs that both got drafted, they do bring in Ty Chandler. Now, I agree with when we had David Cobb on, who obviously CBS Sports. He had, close connection to Tennessee. This is his alma mater. He watched Ty Chandler closely at Tennessee. He's a 4-star transfer coming to North Carolina. He is very much a grinded out, 4 yards of carry back that can help your offense. He can be a supplement to your offense. He can be a complement to your offense, but he is not going to be the feature back in your offense. He is not going to take pressure away from Sam Howell. The pressure is just getting amped up. So I do think that this is a spot where you can kind of look and say, hey, I do think that they, we're grading them harshly because of where they are. They have more pressure on them. So we still expect them to have a good season. Reason it might sound negative in our tone with North Carolina is to pump the brakes on the national image versus Miami, where sound more positive. We think these teams are very similar. It comes down to one game between the two of them, and that is the Miami and North Carolina game. So,
and the biggest thing there is if you're looking at schedule, Miami gets a bye before that game.
right.
And North Carolina doesn't. And so North Carolina gets the game at home, but they don't get the bye. So one thing I will mention, Miami and North Carolina, Miami's returning production ranks 3rd in the country. Like number 3 overall, ridiculous. North Carolina's does rank 32. So still up there. Win totals are very similar. Miami is set at 9.5. North Carolina set at 10. We're pushing this one. So we've got North Carolina going 10-2. So again, we sound harsh on North Carolina. We're really trying to set the difference in why we think Miami will have the edge against North Carolina. North Carolina is going to be a very good team. The defensive line will be the strength of the defense. They've got a lockdown corner in sophomore Tony Grimes, who reclassified after his junior year, to come in. Should have been a senior in high school last year. He'll have a full year under his belt in this system. He's a true lockdown corner. Offensive line for North Carolina was great in the run game. They were not great in the pass game last year. They allowed 4 or more sacks in 4 different games last season, which is not great, especially when you're losing your top 4 pass catchers from last year. Because that's right, the 2 running backs were number 3 and 4 in passing yards last year. Defensive line is young, will be very good. The defense will be very good. They've got a lot of young talent, but the strength of North Carolina the past 2 seasons has been that offense. And while you bring back your quarterback, like you said, we've seen this movie before when the quarterback loses his top 4 pass catchers. The one that most recently comes to mind was Georgia in 2019, where Jake Fromm looked like a completely different quarterback whenever he lost the receivers he's been throwing to the past 2 years. So can Sam Howell rise above that? Can the young talent step up? We definitely think so, but will it be enough to win the Coastal? We're giving Miami the edge there. So 10-2 for North Carolina, 6-2 in conference, and that should get you a New Year's Six bowl potentially. So you're sitting there contending for a New Year's Six bowl, which hey, in year 3 at North Carolina under Mac Brown, I mean, to go from 7-6 to 8-4 to 10-2, those are big jumps, and they're recruiting at a level that they never have. So North Carolina is sitting in a really good spot.
Last year. In a New Year's Six last year. So this could be return trip, just keep building on what they're building on. I agree. And, to go to your point, strength being defensive line, their best recruit this year, Keyshawn Silver coming in. He's a 5-star on the defensive line. So definitely, I think that's going to be an emphasis going forward for them.
Let's go to 3rd in the division. Finishing 3rd, we have the Pittsburgh Panthers. So Pitt coming off of a 6-5 season. Their win total set at 7, but you got the super senior of all super seniors at your quarterback position, Kenny Pickett, coming back for his 15th year in the program. Daniel, that we were a Pitt pod last year. Are we a Pitt pod this year?
Yeah, I'm positive that we're a Pitt pod based on their production. But no, they're, to give you some more P's, they're the personification of the ACC Coastal. This is a team that wins games they're not supposed to and loses games they're not supposed to. They kind of have that reputation. They're a tough out. They had some games last year where, they lost by 1 to NC State. That's a blast. They lost by 1 to Boston College. They had several of these, they had some bigger losses too, but definitely one of these teams that we think is, a team that can grind and be in the game. Yeah, you mentioned Kenny Pickett. I mean, they return 3 out of 5 offensive linemen, both tackles. So that's important. They return, 2 of their top receivers. Kenny Pickett, the, super senior, and then Vincent Davis at running back, who had a good year last year, 4.4 yards carry, 6 touchdowns, 600 yards. So definitely think that they can be, a tough out. When you go off of that top tier, which is Miami and North Carolina, those are the ones we expect to be in the running for, all the accolades, potentially making the championship, and then, doing all these other things. Pitt, we think that, they're going to go through the season and have to grind out each game. But we think that they're going to be a mentally tough, team and able to do that. I mean, Coach, Pat Narduzzi, that's kind of his MO, is toughness and, especially mental toughness. So I think that that's going to be something that they're able to do. Their schedule, you're going to talk about that, but that's kind of favorable for them to kind of have this outcome. Defensively, they returned 6 out of the 11 starters. All their linebacking core and both their corners. So I think that's big. Defensive line, they had a strong defensive line last year. Only 1 returning starter on that defensive line. So definitely an area that they're going to have to show that they can, kind of reload rather than, rebuild. But I think that they can do it. And then, I think that I think it's a very solid team. So I think that I trust them more than the rest of the league that we're about to talk about to kind of finish in the top of this next group.
You mentioned defensive line rebuilding. They will have to rebuild the defensive line, but the linebackers are legit. You've got 3 legit guys at linebacker, and Phil Campbell, Cam Bright, and Chase Pine. And I was reading an article from The Athletic, and this is a quote from Pat Narduzzi. He said, "I spent a lot of time with our offense this spring because I feel like our defense is where it needs to be. But we do need to keep going and not get complacent on that side of the ball too." Now, Narduzzi is a defensive coach, but I was a little surprised for him to be like, "Oh yeah, our defense right where it needs to be," with the defensive line typically being the strength of this defense,
right,
and that being the area to rebuild. So it gets me excited thinking that, hey, if he's thinking we're good on defense, then I'll trust Narduzzi that he's good on defense. Now, on offense, we made the joke, but you have an experienced starter in Kenny Pickett, and you have a receiver in Jordan Addison who was all ACC last season as a true freshman. He's legit. The passing attack will be there. The run game struggled early last season. It looked very different after the bye week last year. That first week after the bye week, they played Georgia Tech, rushed for 317 yards. I mean, it was a different running game second half of the season than it was the first half. So if that comes around, this Pitt team's going to be pretty good. And the win total set at 7. We're going just over that, going 8-4. If you're Pitt, you couldn't ask for a better non-conference. And I know you schedule these games like way out, but Western Michigan, who was a pretty good team, they're not that great anymore. UMass, probably the worst team in FBS. And then you go play at Tennessee, but you're going to play at Tennessee in a year where half their roster transferred out. They're under a new head coach. Like, if you're going to play at Neyland Stadium, this is the time to do it. Like, this is it. And so, and then in the ACC, you got your normal ACC schedule. You do get Clemson out of the Atlantic, but you also get Syracuse out of the Atlantic. So you should very well go 1-1 in those games. So 8-4 overall, 4-4 in the ACC. We're expecting another, good Pitt year, and that's what he does. 2018 they go 7-7. 2019 they go 8-5. Last year 6-5. So 8-4 for Pitt. Let's move right along. 4th in the Coastal, we've got the Virginia Cavaliers finishing 4th in the Coastal. They are coming off of a 5-5 season. Head coach Bronco Mendenhall gets to play his old team this year in BYU, which we talked about when we did the Independence pod. But win total set at 6. So Virginia projected to be doing the old Coastal thing, hanging right there around 6 wins. So will Virginia go to a bowl game? That's our question.
Yeah, so it's funny because before I came in here, I just did a little exercise, asked my wife, since, we're talking about the Coastal and, what the heck do we really know? I said, who's going to win the ACC Coastal? And she said, okay, just give me the list. And so I started listing everybody. And she said either Miami or Virginia. Those were her two. So I feel like Miami being obviously the one that everybody's picking, Virginia's going to be this wild card. I don't, I, I'm not picking them to do anything spectacular, but why count out Bronco Mendenhall as a coach? I think that he's such a solid, leader of men. I think that that's something that is definitely he definitely always has his team ready to play. I think last year was tough for them. They were replacing Bryce Perkins from the year before, who was Mr. Everything. Obviously, he got them, to win the Coastal, and they beat Virginia Tech for the first time in so many years. And last year, they replaced him with Brennan Armstrong. He has a solid year. He was hurt in and out of being able to play, but over 2,000 yards passing, and then 18 touchdowns, 11 picks. So not quite the 2-to-1 ratio that you at least as a baseline you want. So definitely something to clean up. But I mean, I would say solid for a first-year starting quarterback in the ACC. Brennan Armstrong, also their leading rusher, so definitely taking his cues from how Bryce Perkins operated in the offense the year prior. So definitely something to keep an eye on with him. They returned 7 on offense, notably 4 out of 5 on the offensive line, quarterback and running back, and 1 receiver. So that's something to keep in mind there. Defensively, 7 out of the 11 returning. So, their leading tackler from last year, Nick Jackson, 105 tackles. He's their middle linebacker. He's kind of their leader on that side. So definitely someone to keep in mind. I feel good about them for what they are. We expect them to be kind of that middle of the pack, could swing up and win a few games we're not expecting, but shoot, they could lose a couple too. Last year, they fall back to Virginia Tech and lose to them. That was in Blacksburg and Lane Stadium. So, maybe they return the favor this year. Maybe it becomes more of an even rivalry instead of 15 years, Virginia Tech beating them and then it just being a one-off in 2019.
We're going to have to go ahead and have that conversation, aren't we? Virginia Tech.
We are.
We're picking Virginia to win that game. It really comes down to me, and I know this is for you too, is head coaching. And who do I trust more, Bronco Mendenhall or Justin Fuente? I'll take Bronco Mendenhall in that game. We'll get to Virginia Tech in a second. Virginia, though, so another good quote from Bronco Mendenhall. He said, "Our team wasn't built the same culturally, and it wasn't developed the same physically, mentally, or in any other capacity. And that showed up how we played last year." So he basically talked about in this interview that like just how bad COVID messed them up last season, and that he even felt like morally responsible of like, do we need to play this season? And then when his team wanted to play, he's like, if we're going to play, I'm going to coach the team. Like if that's what they want, then I'm going to coach. And they just like, he said they had very strict COVID protocols because he did not want to be responsible for any kid getting sick, give it to their family, just be responsible for something bad happening off the field. Right. And so I know that happened in a lot of locker rooms last year, especially at Virginia, which led to the 5-5 season. So I expect a bounce back from Virginia. Lavelle Davis Jr., after having a breakout freshman season at receiver, him tearing the ACL does hurt them. But you mentioned Bryce Perkins. He was their do-it-all player, right? A quarterback, led the team in rushing, led the team in passing. Bronco feels like they've got that in Brennan Armstrong. Even with his injuries, he did lead the team in passing and rushing last season. He can be that Bronco Mendenhall type of quarterback, which – that offense thrives on a do-it-all quarterback. So he also said that he can name 10 offensive line that he feels good about. And last year he didn't know if he could name 6. So if he's saying he's got 10 offensive line he feels good about, he's got a quarterback who can do it all. The receivers have to catch up. But if Virginia is going to rebound, it's going to come from strides in the secondary. Now, Virginia ranked 123rd out of 127 teams last season in passing plays that went for over 30 yards. They had 29 of those plays. So if Virginia will bounce back, it will be because the secondary got better. They do have 4 seniors starting in the secondary. So veteran laden, hopefully with some, they added another defensive back coach. So they had a guy doing, all defensive backs. They split it up and have a safeties and a corners coach. And Bronco Mendenhall has said that, hey, with the way offenses are going, this is how I feel like we need to address it. So they saw secondary as the issue. If they're going to make strides this year, it will be because the secondary got better. And hey, we look at their past 3 seasons, 8-5, 9-5, 5-5. So we just, kept it on going. 7-5 for Virginia this season, 4-4 in the ACC. In that pivotal, that game of Blacksburg, both teams will go in 6-5, and then Virginia wins the game to go 7-5. Virginia Tech, I guess I'll go ahead and say 6-6 for us. So Virginia Tech finishing 5th in the ACC Coastal, coming off of a 5-6 season. Justin Fuentes on the hot seat. So what, I've said they're going 6-6. Talk to me about the roster, Daniel. What, where do we see some strengths for Virginia Tech, and why do we feel like they're going to struggle a little bit?
Yeah, so you mentioned obviously the game last year with Virginia. It was in Blacksburg. Now it's going to be at Virginia. So something as small as that can make that little, back and forth important, because that's kind of the swing game we have for them. But yeah, Fuente, for whatever reason, all these other people I feel like have benefited from the transfer portal, and I feel like Fuente has just been decimated by it. The most recent casualty, obviously, is Hendon Hooker, his quarterback, who honestly played good ball past couple of seasons for him. And when they were good, it was because of him. And so he left for Tennessee. And that should tell you everything you need to know. He left for Tennessee. So we'll get to Tennessee later, but he left for Tennessee. So that's where we are. Braxton Burmeister, he played sparingly. He had yardage. I mean, he hit through 600 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick. So he played last year. You can call him a returning starter if you want. Most people aren't, because he didn't start most of the season. They returned 6 returning starters on offense. 2 of their receivers, 3 offensive linemen, and James Mitchell, their tight end. I do think that they have some talent out wide with Trey Turner and Tavion Robinson. I do think that those guys can make a big difference year over year coming back this year. Both of them had over 500 yards last year. And so I do think that that's going to lead to them. If they're going to have success, it's going to be because of that. Defensively, they return 8 starters. And it's one of these things where it looks like some of the team had opted out last year. They got some transfers in. They're moving some guys around. So some of those guys that may have started several games last year might not be projected to be starters. But I don't know how much I trust a team that, they lost Khalil Herbert to the NFL, and then they lost Hendon Hooker. So their top 2 rushers from last year are gone. And, I think that Fuente really relies on the running game. So, Raheem Blackshear being a returning, leading rusher, only had 255 yards last year. So I know it, wasn't the season that we all expected, but they still played 11 games. So for that to be the case, I am concerned that they can be enough of a threat on both sides of the ball to compete with most of the teams or a lot of the good teams on their schedule.
Yeah, Virginia Tech, I just don't believe in Fuente. Like, he's come in, they've gone 6-7, 8-5, 5-6 the last 3 seasons. When are we going to see the jump? Now, they do bring in don't bring him in. A former Oregon transfer, Braxton Burmeister. He was on the team last year. They're not deep at receiver or tight end. They did lose 3 starting linemen, 1 to the NFL, 2 to the portal. You mentioned, like, they've been at a loss to the transfer portal. They're 72nd in returning production. Defensive line will be a strength, but Jermaine Walker needs to be close to 100% and lock down one of the corner spots if they're going to be successful on defense. I have a hot take, and that is that if they do what we're predicting them to do, if Virginia Tech goes 6-6, I think Fuente is fired at the end of the season. Maybe it's not a hot take. I just think if they go 6-6, he will be fired because Virginia Tech fans, you look at a decade ago, they went to the ACC Championship 5 out of 7 years, and they won the conference 4 out of the 7 years. So that's the Virginia Tech that can exist. Like Blacksburg, I fully expect when they play North Carolina on that opening Friday night, that's going to be electric. Like imagine that kind of game in November when like Miami comes to town, or when Notre Dame comes in October. And so I'm like, I was looking at the other big games. They're all on the road. Their schedule's tough. They play at Miami. They play at Boston College. They get Notre Dame at home. At a conference, they go to West Virginia. And we're picking West Virginia to win that game. I think they're a notch ahead of Virginia Tech right now. So if all this comes to fruition, I do think Fuente is fired at the end of the season. And then we'll be talking about who does Virginia Tech go after to bring them back, and maybe it's Shane Beamer from South Carolina. Just kidding. Sorry, Cartwright. 6th in the division, Georgia Tech. So it is year 3 of Jeff Collins. Year 3 is typically where we would want and expect results from head coaches, right? Georgia Tech had a little bit of a different rebuild. We do want some results in year 3. They're 13th in the country in returning production. How are we feeling about Georgia Tech?
I'll say we feel better than we felt in a while. So even those years under Paul Johnson, they didn't have a lot of talent, but they would win, 7-8 games just because of the system that they ran. So, this is different. This is something that, this change is not quite apples to apples with everything else that's going on. Last year did hurt a little bit for Georgia Tech with not having all that practice time and things like that. For a team that hasn't that missed bowl games each of the past 2 years, that's some valuable practice time. And practice is really the only thing. I mean, that's really where you develop and you become, you really find your defined roles on the team, and then it culminates obviously in the game. So I think that's going to be big for them. They just had a full spring with a returning starting quarterback that we actually are both pretty high on, just generally speaking, at least his athletic profile of what he can do. Obviously has to shore up those turnovers, and so that guy we're talking about is Jeff Sims. He's out of the Jacksonville area. Was a Florida State commit, and we thought, hey, he's a stud. And he flipped to Georgia Tech, and we're thinking, what's he see in Jeff Collins? So he ends up being the starter last year at quarterback, and man, when he wasn't turning the ball over, I mean, teams were worried about what he could do. He's definitely a dual threat. He's definitely got a lot of green on him. But I mean, one number I can just give you right off the bat: 13 touchdowns, 13 picks. That tells the story of their season and why they were 3-7. I think if he fixes the turnover issue, I think that, they could very easily be a bowl team and, start looking for more. Now they have a tough schedule every year because they have 2 built-in games of rivals that they have to play every year with Clemson and Georgia. And, that's just tough. And then they also, they get Notre Dame this year, they get North Carolina. But as far as the team itself, lost a couple of receivers actually to the NFL, which, for Georgia Tech, that's surprising in and of itself. But 6 returning starters on offense. They're bigger and stronger on that offensive line. Returned 3 out of 5 starters, but they've been getting a bunch of transfers the past few years. Guys from Tennessee, guys from Texas, guys from Vanderbilt, all on those lines of scrimmage. Their running back, Jahmyr Gibbs, because he was he was a true freshman last year. And as far as the recruiting goes, he didn't sign until the second signing day last year. And I remember Ohio State, Florida, there were some big schools that were coming in and trying to get him. He's a running back out of Dalton. And he stayed strong with Georgia Tech. And I mean, he's a 4-star running back. And last year he showed it. I mean, he was their kick returner and then was their starting running back for most of the year. And they returned a guy who had good, a good season the year before in Jordan Mason. And then they have, athletes there and Griffin and Jemias Griffin, all these other guys that are all talented. So for him to rise to the top of that shows me that he's a different cat. I do think that he really can be the playmaker they need at that spot. I like Marquez Ezard, who he's a transfer from Miami. He's from the Atlanta area, from the south side of Atlanta. Shout out Stockbridge High School. And he goes to Miami for a year and then realizes it's not for him, it's not working out. He transfers. This is in 2019, transfers back and has to sit out even though he's basically coming back home. He didn't get his transfer approved. And so he was behind some guys last year. It looks like this is going to be his year to start. He's a former 4-star. So honestly, the more guys they can add with that type of athletic profile, it might seem silly to just be talking about recruiting, but they haven't had this kind of talent come in. Other guys that are very important, I think Kenyatta Watson, he's a defensive back from Texas. He's coming in and he's probably going to start for them at either corner or safety. He's kind of that nickel back. And so I think that that's going to be very important for them. I think that, these guys, they're bringing in Brett Samaglia, the kicker from Tennessee. So they're getting some valuable transfers. They actually brought in 10 in this offseason. So I think that the transfer portal is coming along kind of at the right time for a team like this that's rebuilding, and they really just need to get some guys who've played college football. I'm expecting Georgia Tech to take a big step. It's not going to look like a lot, but they were 3-7 last year. I believe they were 3-9 the year before that. So if they can go, if they could get to a bowl game this year, that would mean so much. We don't have that going. We have it just shy of that. But, man, Jacob, this is a team that if I could put them in a bowl game, I would put them in a bowl game, because those extra practices just they're program builders year over year. And I think that that's something so big for them that they could really use. But, I mean, shout out to Kennesaw State. They play them week 2, and it's the triple option, and it's, Brian Bohannon, who ran it as the offensive coordinator at Georgia Tech. So going to be kind of a fun homecoming. Hopefully Georgia Tech, for their sake can put it down.
Yeah, Georgia Tech probably has one of the most difficult schedules in the country. When out of conference, you play Georgia and Notre Dame. And, you've got a pretty good FCS school in Kennesaw State you should beat in the Northern Illinois, but in conference, like Clemson's always your crossover. You get Boston College out of the Atlantic this year. So we looked at this Georgia Tech team like higher on them to make the jump in year 3, but the jump's going to have to go from 3 to 5 wins because the schedule is just too difficult. And their roster is not in the spot they need to be at to compete for the Coastal. It's getting there. But, Jeff Collins is doing a good job building the culture at Georgia Tech. They're going to profit off of NIL. I think their team will profit off of NIL and their players, I guess. Their social has done a good job with like their branding. And hey, speaking of social, be sure to follow us at the Extra Point Pod on Instagram and Facebook. You can find some great content there. So I think it rivals Georgia Tech, to be honest with you, our social media. So I think it's I'm thinking bias.
That's what people tell me. So yeah, the word on the street.
That's what I hear from you. So
yeah, I say that.
So thanks for the compliment. Yeah, they need to do the little things well. They ranked 9th in the country last year in penalty yards, as in 9th highest amount of penalty yards last year that they gave up. So it's year 3. We need to see a jump. They will make a jump. It just won't be the jump I think the Tech fans want, but hopefully they understand. I do think year 4 is when, if we're going to see the result that will have been 4 recruiting classes in. Like,
Right.
you're going to have a junior quarterback in Jeff Sims. Like, that should be the jump. Another recruiting class in there. So we'll see. But 5-7 for Georgia Tech this year in 2021.
To your point
Last,
about to your point about their recruiting or their penalties. Jeff Collins has said that that's their number one goal this offseason. Obviously turnovers, but turnovers sometimes they bounce your way, they don't. Penalties, he says, I'm good with the aggressive penalties. If it's them playing ball and they get a penalty, that's fine. But I think that also of that percentage, I think that they actually ranked number 1 last year in pre-snap penalties. So they're ninth in the nation, but I think the percentage of pre-snap penalties was actually the highest in the nation. So that's something that he wants to erase. And he said everybody obviously dealt with COVID year last year, but again, I'll emphasize that a team like this that's going through such a great transition, it probably affects more than others. So hopefully for their sake, they can clean some of that up.
and you mentioned turnovers. 25 turnovers in 10 games is not good. So
No.
got to clean up penalties, got to clean up turnovers if they want to make the jump.
Freshman skill position, guys, that's going to do it. So
that's true. Last and least in the Coastal, the Duke Blue Devils. I think we're on the downhill of the career of David Cutcliffe. He has handed over play calling this year, but I mean, Duke, you're coming off of a 2-9 year. The win total set at 4, so not high expectations from Vegas either. I mean, I mentioned Georgia Tech, 25 turnovers in 10 games. Well, only one team beat them, and it was Duke with 39 turnovers in 11 games. So, I mean, Duke, man, somebody's going to be the bottom of the Coastal, and I think it's Duke, and with good reason.
Yeah, and, we don't have to talk about them too long. I don't know how many Dukies are listening. Most of them are already ready for basketball season. Coach K's gone, but whatever. But it's funny because I do agree with you. I think that David Cutcliffe kind of sunsetting on his career. I think he's really enjoyed being the Duke coach after all those years, in the SEC as a top coordinator. But it's funny, they've got 2 offensive coordinators and 2 defensive coordinators. The 2 offensive coordinators are Raekwon Boyette and Jeff Ferris. Defensive guys, Ben Albert and Matt Guerri. So I think that, I definitely see him, like what you're talking about. He handed off the play calling duties. Looks like he's really trying to train up that next, that next generation of coaches, really develop those guys, kind of something that, the big time guys like Saban are always famous for their development of other coaches. It looks like he's kind of taking a fast track to that. But as far as the team goes, very meek, 5 returning starters on offense, 5 on defense. So very, very average. And in a COVID year, in a super senior world where we're going to have, all these crazy, returning production and returning starters and stuff, it's going to be one of those that not only, is highlighted, but gets exposed.
Where do you think they rank?
If I had to say, I think they're pushing 100.
104.
Okay. So obviously Chase Bryce has gone to Appalachian State. That's going to be the biggest change is at quarterback. Gunnar Holmberg, he played in some, meaningless time last year. No touchdowns, has a couple picks. So we don't really know his story yet. David Cutcliffe, he's the guru. He runs the Manning camp. He's a quarterback guy. So I do expect there to be development there. I do expect them to have something to say about it. I guess if we're going to let's talk about something positive. Mateo Durant, their running back. I mean, 800 yards last year, 6.8 yards a carry, and 8 touchdowns. So that's something to build off of. That's something to go off of. We do expect them to kind of take a step back and to kind of be, I don't know, the punching bag, if you will, of the ACC Coastal. It just is what it is. They, return a few offensive line starters, a few receivers, but none of their, defensive line that could be troublesome.
I'm glad you said something nice because I have 3 not nice things to say about Duke. A, there's not a quarterback on the roster who has started a college game or thrown a touchdown in mop-up duty.
Mm-hmm.
B, the run defense has not been the same since their defensive coordinator, Jim Knowles, left for Oklahoma State in 2018. Since then, the Blue Devils have ranked 105th, 87th, and 108th in rushing yards allowed over the last 3 seasons. Not great. And C, I already mentioned it, but 39 turnovers in 11 games. Now, part of that is because Chase Bryce, nice guy. He's so nice that he gives the other team some interceptions. So we'll see. There's not a lot of experience at quarterback. It's right. It's great locker room guy. Somebody's got to be at the bottom of the division. It's Duke. So I hope for Cutcliffe's sake, I'd like for him to go 6-6, make a bowl and retire, but that won't be this year. And I think for Duke, I think the last thing that athletic director wants to do is replace Coach K and Cutcliffe in the same offseason. So I think he's bought some time at Duke. He's put in his time. That's a hard place to win, especially in 2021.
I don't think he'll get fired. I don't think ever. I think it's more of these
he's going to retire.
He'll retire on his terms, and he's a smart guy. He'll know when.
Hey, the ACC's done. So we have our ACC Championship matchup. That is Miami and Clemson. So that will be a fun championship game if that comes to fruition. We're not picking that game yet. That'll be at the end of all of our conference previews. But next week, we got the Big 12. So we're going to do one big, fat Big 12 episode. And, it's too big to break up. It's too small to break up into 2. And then, it's a little too big for one.
It's a little too big for one, but we're just going to enjoy. We're just going to enjoy the convo, and we might not talk a lot about Kansas, so it'll be like they don't exist.
Yeah, because we're picking them to win the conference. We'll skip right over that, and then move on to the second place team. I don't know, West Virginia. So Kansas, West Virginia for the Big 12 championship now. But we'll get to the Big 12 next week. Daniel, any closing thoughts?
I love talking Coastal, but I'm just kind of sad to see it go. So, until next year, Coastal, it's been real. But obviously the whole season, we're definitely going to probably have some great Coastal picks along the way. So
always some hot Coastal picks coming in during the season. That will do it for this edition of The Extra Point. He is Daniel. I'm Jacob. See ya.